After Moscow's plan to impose its own peace plan on Ukraine through America failed, today the Kremlin officially urged not to expect a quick peace agreement on Ukraine, hinted that Russia will now intensify military actions. At the same time, the Donald Trump administration stated that there are growing concerns that the peace plan, which was modified after negotiations with Ukrainian officials, will be rejected by Vladimir Putin. That is why Trump is urgently sending Steve Vitkov to negotiate with the dictator in Moscow, so that Steve Vitkov can try to persuade the bald dictator to agree to some kind of talks again. And to urge Ukraine, not Russia, to make more concessions. United States Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, during his visit to Kyiv last week, warned Ukraine about inevitable defeat on the battlefield if they refuse a peaceful settlement. United States representatives tried to convince Kyiv that, according to Steve Vitkov, Russian forces can fight indefinitely and the scale and frequency of air attacks will only increase. In addition, Driscoll warned that the United States does not have the capability to supply Ukraine with weapons and air defense systems in the necessary quantities. But let's calmly sort all this out. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic in more detail, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel and stay up to date with absolutely all the news, you can do so financially with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription via the links and payment details in this video's description. There are all kinds of platforms and banking details there, including PayPal and even crypto wallets. So I would be grateful for any support from you. So, as expected, after Russia failed to impose its peace plan on Ukraine and Europe through Donald Trump, which for some reason was presented as an American plan, the Kremlin stated that it would be foolish to expect Russia to rush into signing a peace agreement. The statement that a peace agreement on Ukraine could be reached in the near future is premature. Today, Dmitry Peskov, press secretary for the Russian president, made this statement. For now, wait, it's too early to talk about it, said Peskov, answering the question of whether the situation is really closer than ever to a peace agreement being reached. The Russians keep saying not to rush, insisting it's all just dust. And here it would be appropriate to immediately quote Trump's representative, Steve Vitkov, who, in a conversation with Putin's aide Ushakov, directly stated that he was the one who imposed this on Trump. The idea that it is Russia that has long wanted to conclude a peace agreement, and in general always wanted this, but someone constantly interfered. Quote from Vitkov: "Let me tell you what I told President Trump. I told him that you, the Russian Federation, have always wanted a peaceful agreement. I told the president that I believe in this. And I believe that the problem is that we have two countries that find it difficult to reach a compromise. But when we do come to an agreement, we will have a peaceful settlement. I even think that maybe we'll come up with a 20-point peace proposal like we did in Gaza. We developed Trump's 20-point plan for peace, and I think maybe we'll do the same with you." He's addressing Ushakov. Now, just between us, I understand that for peace, Donetsk is needed and possibly in exchange of some other territories. But listen, instead of talking like this, let's speak more optimistically, because I think that's how we'll reach an agreement. And I think Yuri, President Trump, will give me a lot of freedom and authority to make a deal. So if we can create such an opportunity that I talked to Yuri and we discussed it, I think it could lead to great progress. This is a fragment of a conversation between Vitkov and Ushakov from those leaks that were published in Bloomberg. And yes, in this fragment, Vitkov admits that it was he who pushed the idea that Russia and Putin want peace. I did a full analysis of the leaked conversations between Vitkov and the Russians in a separate episode, so check it out on the channel. Well, as you can see, the Russians want peace so much that they're in no hurry to make a proper peace deal. And here I'll remind you that the 28-point peace plan from the Donald Trump administration, which, according to Reuters, was based on proposals from the Kremlin, underwent significant changes. After negotiations with Ukrainian officials in Geneva, Kyiv rejected 3 key points that Moscow insisted on: reducing the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, refusing to join NATO, and the complete surrender of Donbas. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, proposed a meeting with Trump in Washington to discuss sensitive territorial issues, but Trump ignored his request. He went to the Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida for the Thanksgiving holidays. Now, in Donald Trump's administration, there are growing concerns that the peace plan, which was modified after negotiations with the Ukrainians, will be rejected by Vladimir Putin. The New York Times reports this, citing White House officials. Kirill Dmitriev and Stephen Vitkov's original document demanded Donbass's complete surrender, refusal of Ukrainian NATO membership, limitations on the size of the armed forces of Ukraine, and a ban on the deployment of any foreign troops in Ukraine, as well as, quote, Russia's return to the global economy with the lifting of sanctions and joint projects with the United States. Of the plan's 28 points, only 19 remained after Monday's Geneva negotiations. Restrictions on the armed forces of Ukraine, the NATO membership ban, and points on Russian-American relations were removed. According to Politico, the plan no longer includes the territorial points. Zelensky clearly stated we will discuss this with Trump. Additionally, Ukraine's security guarantees were strengthened. In addition to this, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, after all these negotiations, confirmed his readiness to send a peacekeeping contingent to Ukraine. And the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, stated that it could include not only British and French troops, but also Turkish troops. So, this point about the peacekeepers was also crossed out, because Russia demanded that Ukraine abandon this idea. And so far, there are no signs that Putin will agree to the new plan, writes the New York Times. Well, and some Trump officials believe that the Kremlin will reject it immediately. And here is Lavrov. It's already Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister stated that Moscow expects from the American side a version of the plan for Ukrainian settlement that is coordinated with Europe and Ukraine. But if it contains, quote, the spirit and letter of Anchorage are erased regarding the key understandings that were established, then of course it will be a fundamentally different situation. In addition, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov called the peace plan allegedly proposed by Donald Trump the only substantive one. Here's the quote. We believe that this could become a very good basis for negotiations. We still hold this view. But as they say, give him a finger and he'll bite off your whole hand. A source from the Washington Post close to high-ranking Russian diplomats stated that even Donald Trump's original plan is no longer good enough for the Kremlin. They demand that Ukraine be completely disarmed and left at the mercy of the wild Russians. As the Washington Post source stated, quote, Putin's decision will depend on his assessment of the country's stability reserve under the weight of sanctions. If he believes that the problems will worsen next year, he may take a more flexible position. And so, friends, it's time to finally impose new sanctions against all of Russia's trading partners to drive Russia into total isolation. Obviously, they're telling Russians over there that the economy is great, everything is fine. But the question is, if the economy in Russia is doing well, why raise taxes? Of course, right now, propaganda is telling unwashed Russians that Europe is to blame. It's just absurd. If you haven't heard, yes, in Russia, the propaganda says that Europe is to blame for the tax increases for Russians and Putin with his war. And obviously, Putin still wants to put an end to Ukraine's sovereignty. However, even if Trump agrees to this, it's not that easy to deprive Ukraine of its sovereignty against the will of its people and allies. That's why Putin will be looking for new ways to make Trump put even more pressure on Ukraine, not on Russia. So, I'll say it again, it's high time to hit the brazen, bold dictator Putin in the face with sanctions, so that no tax increase for Russians could possibly save the Russian economy. And so that this Russian ship finally sinks for good. That's the only way out of this situation. It's impossible to have reasonable negotiations with Russians because they're wild subjects who now say that what we have doesn't suit them anymore. Nothing will suit them except the capitulation of Ukraine. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.